Welcome to the TELUS Originals DocTalks, a series of talks dedicated to craft, themes, and ideas behind TELUS Originals documentaries with the people behind and in front of the camera. I'm your host, Sabrina Rani Furminger, and for this episode, we'll be talking to Sarah White about Not Quite That. Not Quite That is Sarah's story, as presented on screen by filmmaker Ali Grant. After learning that she carries a genetic mutation predisposing her to breast cancer, Sarah has a huge decision to make. Should she wait and see what happens? Or should she act fast and have a preventative double mastectomy? Whatever she decides will potentially impact how she sees herself and how the world sees her. And in order to make that decision, Sarah turns to a brain trust of close family and friends. Not that Sarah is too concerned about how the world sees her. As a Jewish woman, a mother, and a butch lesbian, Sarah is no stranger to the confused judgments of others. But would life without breasts make everything even more perplexing? With the support of her friends and family, Sarah grapples with what it means to be seen by the world and by herself as a person finding peace amidst change and nuance. Now, besides being the foundation stone for this documentary, Sarah White is COO and co-founder of Fairwear, North America's leading provider of sustainable and ethically sourced promotional merchandise. In addition to operations and human resources, Sarah drives Fairwear's commitment to being an anti-racist organization. She is a member of the President's Group, a network of BC business leaders championing more accessible, inclusive workplaces. For over 10 years, Sarah's volunteered with the Vancouver Street Soccer League and organization that utilizes sport to uplift marginalized folks. Outside of work, Sarah loves time with friends and family and being in the outdoors. The documentary film Not Quite That has opened new areas of interest and exploration, including advocating for gender-affirming healthcare and continuing to uplift the underrepresented lives of many queer folks, especially older lesbians. Today, we'll speak with Sarah White about her remarkable journey with Not Quite That. Sarah White, welcome to TELUS Originals DocTalks.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
I just want to get right into the meat of the film. How did this documentary adventure begin?
Definitely an adventure. I am friends with Ali, the director, and we've been friends for some years. And we were having coffee one day, and I had fairly recently found out about this BRCA diagnosis. I also had to have a oophorectomy, which is a removal of fallopian tubes and ovaries, because there's a higher risk of ovarian cancer as well. So anyway, I was contemplating all these things, and we had a coffee one day, and I had an appointment to go see a breast surgeon about the double mastectomy. And I just sort of sighed and said, this is one more thing. I'm kind of not quite that. And so she said, well, what do you mean? And so I spoke about the ways in my life that I felt sort of in between or not quite something. So I'm going to see a breast cancer surgeon, but I don't actually have cancer. People think I'm maybe trans, but I'm not. I'm butch lesbian. People think sometimes I'm a man. I have kids, but I didn't give birth to them. So there was kind of all that sort of rattled off this list. And Ali said, "Oh, that's a great idea for a story." And I said, "Oh yeah, sure." Because she had just become a filmmaker. And so I said, "Fine, Ali, whatever, you can practice on me." Because I was like, no, not interested. But then I sort of relented and said, you know what, you're new, you can practice on me. And that was kind of the beginning of it. So she pulled out her camera and started filming. And then, a few years later, after a lot of no's to grants, she finally got a really big grant or funding from TELUS Originals. And then it was go time. I mean, there's a lot of in between to that point, but
right.
Yeah.
So as you both began this adventure together? And I keep coming back to that idea of the two of you doing this, together, that it was a collaboration. A lot of that is because of the conversation that I had with Ali, on this very topic, that you were both very present in, in telling this story. But like towards the beginning, like what were your aims for your documentary? Like did you have specific goals about the story that you wanted, to tell, and how your personal story would be used? And this is a two-part question, one of my famous two-part questions. How did these aims and goals change over the course of filming, if at all?
Well, to be honest, I would say my initial goal was to not be in a documentary. I mean, it really was a really difficult process for me. So I don't know if I actually had goals other than to kind of survive emotionally. It was a very, very difficult process for me to accept that my story was worth telling, that it was an appropriate story. This is, 2021, 2020. I was like, I'm a white privileged woman who needs to hear another story about that. So I had so many reservations and hesitations, and then, Ali was a real driver of wanting to tell stories of people like me. And I think what really helped me kind of shift somewhat was when I kind of realized that it wasn't really about me. Like, it was about representation. It was about universal themes that probably a lot of people, hopefully, could relate to or would resonate with. So, I think that was what I focused on, was doing this. It's really hard. I don't really want to do it, but if it will make an impact and if it will make a difference, then I'll do it.
Yeah. What I find amazing too about what you've just said, though, is that it seems like you and the film, like everybody benefited from you having those reservations and expressing them, when you did, because then we end up with this film that, yes, deeply personal, but also accessible emotionally and, thematically to so many different people. Conversation is a huge part of this film, and we will get to the conversations you have, that incredible, circle of people, and, also your incredible family. But the conversations that you had with Ali, throughout, because it's a very intimate collaboration, that between, the person who's, it's your story, and then Ali, who's, telling the story. We don't always get the chance to speak to people who have, to speak to the person whose story is being told on screen. What kind of conversations, did you and Ali have, along the way? Like, I'd love to hear about what that collaboration, what that looked like.
It was extremely collaborative. I learned through the process that there's very different perspectives, philosophies, approaches to documentary filmmaking, from purely extractive to, I would say, what Ali does, which is completely collaborative. Like, she told me, it's your story, and my job is to tell that story. And to not impose my view or perspective on it, which, I suppose is not 100% possible, but I think she did an incredible job doing that. And I had a lot of input. I had a lot of say. I brought ideas to the table. I couldn't have done it any other way. I mean, it was too personal and too vulnerable. Yeah. But I give her so much credit for doing it that way and having that philosophy. And also the way she managed to kind of weave it together so that, to your point, it became this sort of enough vulnerability, and not too much pain, but like enough to allow people to access it. And And I think at one screening, somebody kind of stopped me on the way out and said, you know, your vulnerability gives us all courage.
Mm, wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. So that is like, I mean, and that is, that like goes back to what you were talking about before, right? That there has to be some universality, you know, to touch
Mm-hmm.
people in that way. When I spoke to Ali, you know, she was talked a lot about how she was concerned about the friendship as well, you know, the relationship between the two of you being
Yeah.
impacted. Was that a concern that you had? And, you know, did you feel that your friendship was either like in danger or changing, you know, as a result of, you know, making this film together?
I was definitely, I think mostly I feel bad for how difficult I was. Like, I know I was not easy to at times work with, to live with, for my partner. Um, and our agreement was always that the friendship came first. And she said, you know, you have my guarantee that if you ever just say no or can't do it, or that our friendship comes first. And it really did. And we had challenging times. But it was an incredible process to kind of go through this together. I mean, we had many, many long walks and long talks and, you know, thinking about what should be in and what should be out. And so I'm so grateful for that. I mean, it's only kind of made our friendship stronger, you know, I think. I said to her yesterday, I said, now I have two work wives because we're always talking about the film still, because, you know, we're on to next thing. So yeah, it was, I don't know how anybody can do a documentary about a person, and not that you have to be friends, but you have to have that approach almost that you that you have the right and the responsibility to tell this person's story.
Yeah. I am curious because, you know, part of Ali's story and, you know, her journey is that like she came to documentary later. Like she had a whole other career, a whole other life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you feel like a spark has been lit in you? Like would you consider like working in the, you know, in the space, you know, either as a filmmaker or producer or, you know, collaborating in some way even with Ali?
Um, Interesting. I mean, I loved, you know, I'm a creative person. I loved the process of, you know, that ideation and creativity. I love that part. I hadn't really thought about specifically being involved in film, but the fire for me is really around, I guess I would say, activism, like having
Mm.
seen the impact of this film and the kind of thirst for representation for many people, but specifically for my demographic.
Yeah.
I want to figure out how I can keep bringing this message to people, bringing this film or the message somehow. So that's kind of my fire, is feeling like activism and just, yeah, really wanting to carry on talking about this and spreading the word and bringing the film wherever I can.
Yeah, documentary is such a really powerful form of activism as well, especially a film such as this one, which brings people, anybody who watches it, you know, they are, you know, stepping into, you know, your life, and it, you know, it can breed like empathy and compassion, which are things that, you know, we are lacking, you know, in so many areas in life, right? And that's something that, you know, can actually help, you know, bridge gaps and, you know, empathy, just thinking about life from somebody else's perspective and point of view. Um, I do need to like the conversations that are captured in this film, where you are sitting with your friends or you are sitting with your family, are fascinating and so moving. And when I was watching you sitting with your friends and everybody was just speaking about, you know, their relationship with their bodies and stuff, I was like, wow, like I'm grateful I have a friend group that's like this as well, who cares me, and to have been a fly on the wall, you know, or have a seat at the table like that night.
Right. Right.
Um what did you what did like bring us to the table then, that night where you're sitting there, with your friends. How did you sell it to your friends that you were going to do this? And then how did it unfold? And like, did you have to work hard to create an environment where everybody felt comfortable enough to speak, so openly about such, really vulnerable topic as, their bodies and their sense of self?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I am that person who's always like, well, I don't know. I got to ask, what does everybody else think? Or let's talk about it. So, that was the premise. So they all knew it was going to be filmed. These are people that obviously we had, fairly deep connections with or friendships, and didn't know how it was going to go, to be honest. Like we told people, this is what we want to talk about. This is why, and it's going to be filmed. And so, speak or not speak, like whatever you're comfortable with. And so it started, and there wasn't really like, okay, you go first and it's going to be like this. It just happened the way it happened. And it just went around the table, and not every single one is in the film, but it went around the table, and nobody did the like, oh, that reminds me of me, or I had that. Like nobody said a word. And it just like, you hear a pin drop, and it just became this incredible dialogue and for each person. And every single one of us after said, I learned things about you that I didn't know. And you actually surprised me. Like we thought certain people would respond differently than they did. And we actually had like, I think 3 more of those dinner parties, like to kind of continue the conversation.
Wow.
Sometimes with different people. And I'm sort of, want to do another one soon, because it'd be nice to do it kind of like a year later. But yeah, I guess it's just that level of trust with each other. But I'm so eternally grateful to those friends for doing that, because they're in the film too, and they're making themselves very vulnerable. And probably one of the most common comments about the film is, I wish I'd been at that dinner table. I wish I'd been there. Or I want to start one of those with my friends. We need to be having more conversations like this. And I think it is. It's just sort of symbolic of, we need to be talking about real things with each other with respect and empathy. That's what is going to kind of help the world be a bit of a better place,
Yeah. Respect and empathy. I mean, truly a lot of what is lacking, and yet so important. And also, I mean, caring about yourself, because also that's the thing too that we don't always do is, care about ourselves. That night, and also the subsequent ones, how did those conversations impact you? I know how they impacted me as a viewer, but as far as for you and your journey, that night, or your conversation with your family, like how did they move you? How did those conversations impact you or move you?
I think in a number of ways. I mean, just the beauty of friendship and vulnerability, just so important that is to be in my life. And I think it was a really good, they were good sounding boards. When I look at what I say in the film about like that I was actually considering reconstruction now, some years later, it seems bizarre that I would even consider that, because of where I've kind of evolved and grown through this whole process. But that, they were sounding boards that just kind of answered my questions, which is like, no, I was feeling pressure from the outside world, from the medical world, to consider something that was probably totally inappropriate to even suggest to me, or to at least not suggest other alternatives. And so, when you're venturing into something you've never done before, it's not like, well, last time I did this, it was like this. It's like, I really needed sounding boards. I really needed to hear what other people said. And it really helped, kind of validate and make me more confident and sure about my decisions.
Yeah. I would love to hear about your favorite filming days. And because I asked Ali this question, I'm curious to see if you answer the same, you give some of the same answers.
Um, I think there's just what came to mind were two, um, the family conversation with our boys, which actually went on for like, again, unexpected, like an hour and a half. And again, it was, I think the film, as hard as it was for me to do, it allowed me the opportunity to probably have conversations I may not have had. Like I may not have called a dinner party and said, "Hey, what do you think about your breasts?" Or, "Hey, kids, let's talk about our family." So that was such a moving situation. And then for sure the photo shoot. That was like the most fun and the
That was
biggest learning.
Ali's.
Yeah, for sure. It was because like I said, a lot of it was, stressful, heavy topics, like whatever I had to be on. But then it was just this pure celebration and just a lot of fun. And I don't know, like it was kind of a new experience, I think, for all of us in a way to be doing this thing and like standing up and celebrating how we look, which is never really done.
Yeah.
And when we were at the last film festival we're at, which was in Ontario, the London Lesbian Film Festival, which is like 350 people, mostly I would say our demographic, queers and lesbians. During that scene, they started clapping and hooting and hollering. And it was just so moving because it was like they got it. And it was this, we never see this celebrated. There's no real drag queen, like on TV. There's no kind of celebration of this identity. So anyway, I love that one.
How does it feel to watch yourself on screen?
Yeah, I thought it would be a lot harder than it is, but at this point, I know a lot of people say, "Oh, I hate seeing myself on screen." And I don't know what it is. Like I was anxious and nervous. And then when we opened in, May of last year at DocSet, I showed it to all the family and everybody was good with it. And then like a switch went off and I was okay. And when I've watched it so many times and I'm sure there's parts where I'm like, ooh, but I don't know. Like I never expected. I thought I'd just be cringing the whole time, but I don't mind. Maybe I'm just watching the story, not really me, and listening for people, how they respond and where they respond. And yeah, I suppose I've been able to remove myself from it. Like it's out in the world now and it's not so much about me.
Right. It is what you intended it to be. It is out there and it's everybody's developing their own relationship with it. The you though that we see on screen is the you before you had a lot of these experiences, and the you before you presented it to the world. Like obviously, because that's how time works and experiences. When you look at yourself on screen, is there anything that you wish you could tell yourself, from like back then or, about what was to come at all, either with the decision you were going to make or with the experience of the screen? I just think it's so powerful, to be sitting there and to be watching yourself and, to be like, I'm not that person anymore. I have other experiences now. What would I say to myself?
Yeah, it's interesting. I might have tried to save myself, like the the questioning and the journey, like because this was all medical stuff, but obviously it was so much emotional and identity. And I think because of my age, I probably had a little bit missed, the whole, like the generation of people who were pronouns and transitioning and gender identity and non-binary, like all of those things I kind of, a little bit passed me by, or I passed it by, I think because of my age. And this just threw me into that exploration. Like I was all over it. So I suppose I want to look back and say, um, just fully embrace who you really are and don't compromise. It's kind of like what I say at the end, it's don't compromise. Like just be yourself. And as hard as it is to get up every day and walk outside, just be that.
Yeah.
And in fact, at the last film festival, the other one, in the Q&A, this young person got up and said, as a young kind of baby butch, what advice would you give me? And it's kind of the same. It's like be yourself and embrace who you are, and I really acknowledge how hard it is.
Yeah. What were some of the challenges that you faced and overcame during filming specifically?
Partly what I mentioned earlier. I really, really struggled with accepting that my story was worth telling, and that I could take up this much space. And there's a little bit of a joke in our family because they're very loud and everything. It's kind of like take a number, because I often am the quiet one, even though I'm not always like that, but I'm the quiet one. I get spoken over. I've kind of always felt like I haven't been able to step into myself, or I allow myself not to be seen. And that was really probably the biggest, hardest thing, was to really accept that and find a way to embrace it, and find a way to go with this project, this documentary. Yeah, and I think just the vulnerability, like I just, some days I just felt like I was turned inside out. What do I want to share? What do I not want to share? What should I share? Yeah, I think the vulnerability piece, I just felt like for years, I just felt like I was, my skin was very thin, and like I was walking around naked most of the time.
I'd love to speak a little bit more about Ali, especially because this was, the first big project, in her new life. How would you describe her directing style?
She's very kind of directive and not directive. I think she had a sense of an idea of what she wanted to do, but was always willing to listen. And I think sometimes, she probably didn't agree with me. Sometimes she would say, and sometimes she wouldn't. And I kind of learned that, she has a way of just being silent. And so sometimes I'd have to prod a bit, like, do you really agree with this or not agree with this? But I just think she had such patience with me, because I think, sometimes we wouldn't agree, but it was also just dealing with my kind of volatility in ways at times. I think she did an incredible job of kind of containing and compartmentalizing her own struggles, whatever they were. She had her support system. I had mine, but I also had to talk through a lot with her. And so she was really there as a friend and a director. And when she felt strongly about something, she said it. And definitely there were times where I'm like, okay, this is not a hill I'm going to die on. And I respect your professional opinion.
Yeah. Because, not every, filmmaker and film subject have the relationship that you and Ali have, when they're going into a project. What kind of advice would you have for someone, who has asked a film, who has had a filmmaker say, "Hey, your story would be great for a documentary. I want to be the one to tell it." What advice would you have for that person?
I would definitely tell them to have a very frank conversation with the director about what their philosophy is about documentary filmmaking and what input the subject would have or not have. Look at their other work, ask about the other work, like, you know, did the subject see rough cuts? Will I see rough cuts? Like, all depending on what they want. Like, if for me, it had to be that way.
Yeah.
But the philosophy is a huge thing. Even the our boys had Ali come over sort of for a family meeting before it all kind of got underway, because they really wanted to know this. Because there's a lot of documentaries out there that are, you see how a subject can be completely manipulated or misrepresented.
Yeah.
And the director's whole personal bias or influence can come through. And so they wanted to make sure. So if that's what a person feels strongly about, then they need to look at their work and really have a frank discussion with the director.
Yeah. Then what advice would you have for the director? Especially because you had such a wonderful time working with Ali. What are some either best practices from that relationship, or or warnings of things that went so well for you, but you could see not going well, for others?
Yeah, I mean, I feel pretty strongly about this, having seen other documentaries that don't, in my mind, adhere to this kind of philosophy or commitment. I think it's super important to have ultimate respect and empathy for your subject, and to take yourself out of the picture as much as possible, and really just to be the vehicle. Like, have a vision, of course, because obviously Ali did. Like, the film is successful because Ali made a really good film. It's like, great, it's my story and I'm fairly, engaging, but she made the film what it is. And that's such a fine balance between, having the subject tell you everything and do this and do that, to, sticking to your own path and your own vision. It's finding that kind of magical balance between having your own direction and then integrating and the subject's needs and wants. And the bigger budget, I'd probably hire a therapist or something, counselor to manage the depending on the subject matter, right? So
yeah. I love that we keep coming back to respect and empathy. That's clearly it is. I mean, it's so important in the world, and it's so huge for you. If you were to film an update for the film, what would you include?
I would definitely grab all the friends and family, like anybody who was in the film, and say, where are you now? How did the film? Because I know the film, that first dinner conversation impacted people, friends, in ways that they talked about. So I would love to hear how it's impacted them. I would talk about, my own journey. And I guess I'd love to, if there was a way to incorporate it to the journey of the film itself, from the opening of Doxa, where honestly we were quite surprised at the kind of impact it had. Didn't realize in some ways how many different types of people would be impacted, and to kind of document what people have said about it. Like, I wish we could have taped some Q&As, but those Q&As that we've been to, probably 8 or something, have just been so astoundingly amazing.
Yeah, tell me a bit more about that. About you, because you said you were surprised by, the kinds of people who were impacted. Like who was impacted, and what was the feedback that really surprised you?
That I think what became apparent is that the themes, like anybody can relate to not being themselves. Could be a straight man or a straight, like you can be anything and have, can resonate with you about self-acceptance and identity, difficult childhoods. People have said like, when you talk about how you were afraid of having kids, I had that reservation, but I never knew how to articulate it. Like I did, so there was just like so many levels that way. And a lot about, clearly my demographic and just so hugely it's like this, they're perched for representation, like just to see themselves, like so many times, like never seen myself on screen. I've never seen myself represented. But it really was like Doxa, when we opened, and some of the other festivals were like a complete range of people from just kind of all over the map. And I think, it's the way I've been saying it lately is, this film is for those of us who need to be seen, and it's for others to see us.
Oh. Do you still feel like you're not quite that? I mean, Ali tells a very similar story about, when you said that during that first conversation. She's like, that's the film. That's the title of the film. But, your experience, that you've had, and realizing too that there is a universality to that, those feelings. Do you still feel that way?
I think in terms of the big picture of society, I'll always feel like that. But I don't personally. I feel this whole process has given me so much more confidence, self-reliance. Just, I feel more grounded in who I am, and I feel far more bold about showing up in the world and talking about this and advocating for this, which I don't think I would have had before. And I just don't care so much as I probably did. Because I'm, in the business world, so I'm all constantly at events and things, and, I constantly have these experiences of being othered. But I think I just don't care, and I'm more likely to say something, kindly and gently, but I'm more likely to say something and not just say, oh, here we go again, and find my one or two people that I can connect to, understand what's going on. So yeah.
That does remind me of one of my favorite shots in the film, which is of not Sarah, still not Sarah, still not Sarah. Like that was incredible. And I did chuckle at that moment. Has there been have there been any moments in either like media interviews or Q&As where you're like, I can't believe they asked me that, or wow, they watched the film and they just completely missed the point, and if those happen, like how have you navigated those?
I can't say there've been any. Maybe somebody thought them, but not one thing that
I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah, there've been a couple of like personal interactions where people were just like, I don't know, kind of intimidated or threatened or something, and just sort of made it about themselves. But like I could count 2 out of hundreds. Mostly people, what I love about it is that people just come like right up and just like talk about this and we'll talk about that, or this means this, and it's just immediate conversation and connection. There's no
I love to hear that, because that can also, those interactions can often not be so good. You mentioned that you're in the business world. I would love to like pivot a little bit and to talk about Fairware and the work that you do, because as I'm reading this, I'm like, anti-racist, gender-affirming healthcare, Like I was like, I'm so excited to actually to talk to you about that. So can you give us the origin story for Fairwear?
There were
Yeah.
sure. So well, that's probably 20 years ago now. My business partner, Denise Tashiro, we were friends, and I was at a party with her, and it's her birthday party, and she said, I have this idea. So her, at the time, she worked in Mountain Equipment Co-op when it was a co-op, in management, and she was involved in sustainability and ethical sourcing and all the things. And at that time, sustainability wasn't really a mainstream term yet. MEC was, auditing when their production went offshore, they were auditing their factories. And so a lot of other brands had trust in them. And so she would get asked by other companies to use their products, like MEC shirts and jackets, to put their company logos on because they trusted them and they didn't have time or resources to research where their products were come from. And also, Denise experienced having really great companies give away really bad merchandise, and not know where it was coming from, and it was coming from sweatshops, etc. So she had this idea that there's a gap in the market, and this would be a great idea, and slow startup distributorship, you don't need a lot of money. So there were three of us at the time who kind of threw in $5,000 or something. And I, at the time, had more flexibility. She wasn't ready to kind of quit her day job quite yet. And so in my garage at the time, I started up with phone cables and internet cables coming out from the house. And it started from there. And then
that's incredible.
And nothing about the world. It was really, the business was not because we like church, because it was because we wanted to drive change in an industry that was sadly in need of, change around mobility levels.
That is fantastic. How have you found that business owners, have, or people who are doing, those decisions, those, ordering decisions, are people more receptive now than they were then? I love to hear that. What really set something in my brain kind of vibrating was the statement that your organization is committed to being an anti-racist organization. Can you tell me what this looks like in practice?
Mm-hmm. So Fairwear is a certified B corporation. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's an assessment that measures your social and environmental impact, and it's quite rigorous. It's been around for 10, 12 years, maybe a little more. And so I mentioned that because it's really grown over the years. So that's where we have gravitated, because there's many like-minded folks and people who are all, regardless of their type of business, they're committed to sustainability and, some and more to things like, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism. And recently, our company did a training through this organization. Mm-hmm. And so what it looks like is that I'd say over the years, we've been committed to diverse hiring. So we should ensure that our workforce reflects our city. We should be, now it's probably over 50% of non-European descent, benefit plans. There's a whole bunch of different things that we do. And I think our learning in the last bunch of years is that it's not enough to just say, we have policies on diversity inclusion. It's we are boldly saying that we're working towards being anti-racist. And it means that we recognize that white supremacy and colonialism and capitalism have had like incredibly negative and devastating effects on different groups in society, and that part of being in business, our responsibility is to do good and to, with where we buy but also who our employees are and how we treat them and what we're committed to as an organization. So we practice, anti-bias, like learning about words and phrases that are offensive and why, what the history is. And so
Wow.
for us, we're really trying to move into like, what I've said recently is that there's a difference between having policies and living policies.
Yes. That's fantastic. I mean, especially after 2020, there's a good like 6 months and everybody was getting their, diversity and equity and inclusion statements and, or bringing like somebody in to like run like one info session or something. And then they're like, well, look at us. And we had the black square on our Instagram and we're anti-racist. But it's not like that was just like it is paying lip service, So when I read that in your bio, I'm like, that definitely like I needed to know more. And what I also find interesting is, we talked about documentary, for you, there has to be like that activism angle, that making change angle. And it seems like with your business, like that there is that, as well, like both with like what the products that you sell and also with the, with the kind of company, that you're running and who's hired there. So I love that. I love pulling a thread all the way through.
Yeah.
Another thing, and this ties both thematically to the documentary, but it was also in your bio, was that you, because of not quite that, you're interested in advocating for gender affirming healthcare. And, I think for a lot of people, if they don't have, a lot of, they might not understand even what, gender affirming healthcare is unless they, or have to deal with it or somebody they love, is dealing with it. So can we talk a little bit about, how the healthcare system, traumatizes or victimizes, gender nonconforming, people, and also the way that like it was this film that kind of, brought you, probably not brought your attention to this, but, inspired you to like take action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's early days. There's an organization called BRCA in BC, which is an organization that provides education and support with people who either have BRCA or other mutant BRCA mostly. And also there's now free testing for that gene. So I've done a talk there. But I think the thing that really struck me is when I look back at my experience of going through the system and seeing the surgeon and saying, okay, do you want to have reconstruction? And I was like, well, I don't think so. Just, well, you really should go and see a like a plastic surgeon, because you don't want to regret not having considered it. So when I look back, I'm like, why did anybody send me to a plastic surgeon about boobs? Like, it should have been like, are there other options? Do you maybe want to have like a different chest? Like, do you want to like more have like what other options are there? And
Right.
Also that just being flat is not a viable option. Not so much an option, but it's not considered aesthetically pleasing, or it's more like, oh, well, you don't want to have surgery or plastic surgery because of the risk, so that's fine. And it's like, no, there's a whole world out there of flatties and breasties that advocate and support each other in being flat, and that there's nothing wrong with it, and let's celebrate our bodies the way they are. But so I think, I've read some studies out of the US. I don't know if there's been actual studies in Canada, but like a oncologist that I know and I've spoken to said that she thinks there's similar experiences, which is that people the pronouns aren't like, can you imagine there's trans men or non-binary folks who need to have, the virectomies or their breast removed, or breast tissue, and the way they're treated in the system is not with, care and respect. Like there's just not much knowledge about how do I work with the gender nonconforming or trans person, and in the way that works for them. Most of them are kind of humiliated or othered, or just they're not seen for who they are.
Yeah.
And I've given the options that would be most appropriate for them.
I would imagine that would keep trans people and non-binary people away from, going to the doctor, having to have any kind of interaction with the medical system.
Yeah.
The conversations then that you've had, or the talks that you've given, how receptive do you find, like, I know it's a generalization, but like, do you find that healthcare, the healthcare field, that they are receptive at all to these?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like the people, I mean, I can't sort of speak in a big general terms. It's sort of, like I said, early days for me. I'm connected to certain people that really are really doing amazing things and advocating for this kind of healthcare. So I think it's coming, and I want to find ways that I can plug into that as a, patient or whatever I'm called, to sort of give that perspective. And because sometimes the personal story is what shifts somebody's opinion or perspective.
Yeah, or inspires the respect and empathy that we've established is important. Maybe this is another documentary then in your future. Yeah. We are coming to the end of our time together today, Sarah. So I want to return then to, although we didn't really leave, but to not quite that. So for our final question, how would you like audiences to feel when the end credits are rolling on Not Quite That? In a perfect world, how would you like them to feel? What questions would you like, to inspire, or what conversations would you like them to have, in the lobby after after a screening and they're just milling around?
Well, it's a little bit cheating because I've experienced a lot of that. But when you ask that, my first response was how I have felt it screenings, and I guess I've kind of felt the energy of others, which is this kind of, it's emotion, but it's also joy and hope. So it's that feeling of, like, I think what Ali's kind of captured, which is like you feel something and it's hard, but then there's also this joy and hopefulness, I think. And I think that's what I want people to feel. And, the kind of comments people are like, I just went home and changed my clothes. Like, just those kind of comments one after the other about, and just to be impacted in some way in their own personal life, that it does something for them. That it provides some small piece of healing or validation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sarah, for your time today.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to and watching the TELUS Originals Doc Talks. And a big thank you to our guest, Sarah White. Watch TELUS Originals at TELUS Optik TV Channel 8 and watch.telusoriginals.com, and follow us at TELUS Originals on Instagram. Doc Talks are a production of TELUS Originals. This episode was produced by Sharon Bradley with technical support by Matt Waterworth. Ken Soy is a production executive for TELUS Originals Doc Talks. Doc Talks are produced on the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. The viewpoints expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of TELUS.